Hello. In this video, I wanted to address or highlight and showcase what you would start to feel if your dimensional reality around you would start to shift and morph to the point where you would be able to be an observer of yourself from from the unified perspective of consciousness, but would still be able to zone in, and then choose to experience yourself in this three-dimensional form. And so energetically, um, I will try to explain it energetically, and then also I will try to explain it metaphorically, from some sort of three-dimensional interpretation standpoint of our living. But the direction in which we're heading, or the direction in which you would consider um, forms of awareness or enlightenment or recognition of self going, would eventually end up in this place. So you would eventually end up in the space where you are a unified being. Or by being, I don't mean three-dimensional being, I mean you're actually unified consciousness, and unified, but at the same time you hold a perspective of individuality. I'm saying that when I channel, maybe even when I don't. Right, and so you would belong to the whole, and you would actually be able to relate and feel your essence in the whole as your primary narrative, right? So your primary being of creation would be able to recognize yourself the most, or feel the most alive, or feel the most um, centered when you're unified with your whole, right? So the way three-dimensional aspects would describe that is you would be your higher self, right? A lot of times we perceive our higher self to be something greater than us, but that is somehow part of us, but yet it is somewhere else. um, but then kind of on the flip side of that, or from the other standpoint, our higher self is actually conjoined to the unified field, right? To the oneness, to the source, or whatever you want to refer to it as. And then it functions in this individualized interpretation of self as being one in the whole. And so you get this perspective from the top down view of the whole, right? Being the complete essence of everything, of all the possibilities, and your higher self, your unified being, or your whatever. It just functions as inseparable part of the whole, right? So there's a whole, and you're just part of the whole. But at the same time, you are recognizing, and you are that dot in the center of perception, right? And the perception is your personal interpretation of the whole, right? And so you're inseparable, you're one, but yet you cognitively are drawing on that perception of self, right? And so that describes the unified feel, or the wholeness, or the unity, or where your higher self belongs, right? And so through that, then I will try to work our way down, is then your three-dimensional self, in this form of its densest vibration, right, lives here to fully interpret and immerse itself in the experience of life, right? We are we are so in love with the idea that we exist, and that the stuff that happens to us throughout the day is real, and we we are so good at believing that and living that, um, because the emotional influx of energies that can exist and do exist in this, tight, wound, dense space of us is very great, right? So our belief in this reality creates it, and then our love for the expression of its outcomes amplifies it. And so we have the most range of experiences and the most range of emotional highs and lows and loves and hates within this space, right? Like the playground is so fun, that we just believe it and we love it, and we're here for it, right? We're here for it. But at the same time, right, as I come to describe this dimension of what others refer to it, Tanya refers to as 3D. We also exist at the same time, at the same moment, in this unified consciousness where we are one, and a higher self is unified with our being there. And so through through this stretch of possibilities, you will now be able to see and feel the stillness of yourself in this form up here, in the unity in your higher self mind. And then at the same time, you will be able to recognize and observe from here your your three-dimensional self, and all the games and all the participations and all the things that we do in order to make this real, right? And so once we start to recognize these two and kind of pulsate these two, this one's very easy. We're in it all the time. It's all we have ever known. But once you start to exercise your muscle to trying to get into this space will just awaken itself permanently, right? This recognition will always be there. And now when both of them are basically kind of like on board, you can and will and are deciding to propagate this wholeness into your 3D space and pause at any point of your awareness along the way of how much control you want to have or not want to have within your 3D, right? So I previously touched on this, but I think this particular video is basically going to kind of like a more in depth uh, demystification of the concept. Is you can live in the space where you're completely immersed in the 3D without zero awareness of who you are, right? You believe it, you feel it, you cry about it, you yell about it, you have fights, just full immersion, right? Great. Honestly, it's all I've never known you know, for at least 30 something years of my life. Um, and then from that, once you have the spark of recognition, right now that spark is coming on board, in basically all of us. um, you can start to feel the consciousness. You can start to feel like, wait, there's something out there that is bigger, that is larger, right? However you connect to it, whatever modality or teachings you follow, you will get to that same place. We're all touching on that same unity and the same oneness, regardless of the teachings that we are adapting ourselves to. By teachings, I mean, whether you're going to it through the form of um, you know Taoism, or through point of Buddhism, or through form of Judaism or Christianity or Hinduism, you name it. Oh heck, you going through the form of atheism, right? You already touched that, so you already know that that's there. Then basically the question is, how long will you allow it not to be your truth, or not recognize it? So once you start to recognizing, this is the point where I'm at, in telling you the connection to the story is, once you start to recognize the infinite potential, right, you can start to basically, I would say, downgrade itself, but not from the three-dimensional thought of the one is lesser than the next. It is not the truth. So basically it's almost like a choice of how high up in altitude will I choose to be at in order to recognize or observe my 3D space in comparison to the unity of my stillness, right? And so that is kind of the scale. And I look at it as almost, you when prior to now I saw the kindergarten and this 3D space of life as the possibility of a playground. I now have the possibility of this scale as a new playground. So within any one moment, I'm noticing myself being able to choose, do I stand there in the sense of an observer going, "Oh, look, Tanya feels this particular scenario so deeply." And then look, "Oh my gosh, look at all these emotions that she's feeling right now," right? So I can be there. Then I can go, "Oh, look, Tanya is selecting this outcome versus that outcome," right? I can go, "Look, like I'm cognitive enough to where I'm not, right? I'm watching Tanya. I'm cognitive enough to where Tanya has a choice. But then now I'm cognitive enough to what choice I'm making," right? There's another step. There's just another step, another way to view it, right? It's almost like a paradoxical mirror that you're reflecting from. And depending on where you stand, you see 10 Tanyas versus you see 2 Tanyas. So that, there's, if that is helpful at all, somehow that is the explanation that is coming through. And so then above that, right, there's another reiteration of, wait, I don't have to watch what choice Tanya's making. How about I let Tanya make this choice, right? And I almost start to discern from a higher standpoint, and in the way um start to take over um the three-dimensional density and replace it with my higher dimensionality knowledge, view of self, and then insert that outcome or insert that choice in, right? Now, at the same time, please recognize that to begin with, first you have to know what the choice is, right? One, you have to know, look, I'm making a choice. Like, first you have to derive awareness as, I'm me and I have choices, right? There's step one, awareness. Wait, I have choices, right? Step two is, what are the choices that I have, right? And you can kind of like decide, how do I want to respond to this scenario? How do I feel like responding in this scenario, right? And so you can draw, you can kind of start to play with that. And then after that you go, well, instead of me choosing here and choosing there, what if I just, I'm sorry, instead of me knowing that this exists and that exists, now I go, wait, what if I just choose this? What if I insert this as my answer? What as my outcome, right? And so you can touch on the ideas of manifestation as such, right? My higher self is already inserting this line that is available, and in fact is the easiest path to travel. So from my previous video, that is how it relates. This is already a path that is the easiest to travel for you, right? And so from that standpoint, then you can kind of be in that next dimensional space of going, oh look, here's the outcome that Tanya will select, and here's the outcome that I will provide for her to select. And then you step back and go, let me just watch the scenario without outcome. Let me allow to let this life play out as an outcome, right? And this is the next step up, where you're not necessarily involved in the fact that you have a choice. In fact, what choices do you have? In fact, that you're going to be making a choice. You're now stepping back and looking at yourself as, I'm an observer of is, right? Things are as they are, they will happen. And so within that step, there's that your higher self, I would say, um is just an observer of the outcomes and realities, right? um and you can spend a lot of time there. You can spend a lot of time watching yourself, um, observing yourself as is, right? But at the same time, you can step back and fully immerse yourself in in your life here. I guess I say here, right? But in your life in the three-dimensional densified version of self, right? And so at the same time, so what I'm finding is um you can have two experiences. It was just weird, right? And I'm saying this having not fully immersed of where this is going to go, but I'm having an experience of being an observer, completely separated from the outcomes and desires of myself in my three-dimensional form, and I'm just watching me. It truly feels like I am the whole. I am stillness, I am oneness, and I'm just watching me in the most fascinating and interesting way. And at the same time, I am really, really having this experience. I believe that this has texture and this is black and this is white, and I can feel my body and I feel like I exist, and it's all very, very real. Um, and then at the same time, I have this way of scaling this spread, right? And then being able to watch myself from the selection of choices, and then being able to watch myself from even the recognition of choices. And I think there's other scales here that do exist that I have yet to reach. And I think they will come to cognition as the time comes, and so I think future videos might touch on those. But that is the extent of where you could be, and so that to observe oneself is in essence that, right? To observe your choices, to observe your actions is there. And then in reality is depending from where you're observing yourself, you then can decide how vested you want to be in those choices, and how vested you want to be in in the outcomes of the 3D, right? You could be vested to where you care, and then therefore you make a choice that is of your greater good or your greater path. Um, or you could not care at all if you're, in that unity consciousness, all is the same. There's no duality, it is all love, and therefore the outcome is really irrelevant. And it's really neat to be able to jump between all of those scales, and kind of feel them, and then realize the vastness of me. And it's almost like like I said earlier, it's a new playground, right? It's a new playground that you can start to kind of get used to, and see where that goes. Um, but from the three-dimensional standpoint, if I were to dive into it, right, the possibilities of that are, and they're endless. And so the alchemist, right, the mystics of the past, um, whether or not they have explained this in the past or they have addressed this, but this is exactly what they are doing, and this is exactly what they're feeling, and this is exactly where they're coming from, right? Like the Kabbalion talks about level of awareness and where you are, and this is exactly what this is, right? Is I'm just using Kabbalion as an example, right? But like Buddha, being on a different level of like dimensional interpretation, right? um or or even trying to think of what other teachings relate to this, like Taoism has teachings of various energetical forces, and you being you, and you being this, and you being that, and then there's just no you, right? um and so that scale exists in all of the teachings, and you derive at the same place. I am not putting a marker on it because I think it would be doing a disservice on it to define this. But it is in essence a very individualized expression of the unified truth, right? And I'm just trying to explain to you of how that looks and how that feels, and how you can start to experience it, and then not trying to tell you what to do with it, but I'm trying to explain to you various steps and observations that you can take of yourself, right? And what you do with it, in the long run, is completely up to you and your individual choice, right? Like the the concepts of application of this are limitless, right? And so depending on your personal desires and your personal manifested choice of higher self, you can have the most profound interpretation of this and most profound applications of this. But if you find yourself comfortable in stillness, then you can also release the need for profound, and just simply be there to watch. And I find that, I don't know, I find the play of that very interesting. And then in turn, like, being able to have that choice of where do I want to place myself today, is very interesting. And so I hope this is helpful. I hope this kind of like identifies these different levels. I don't think, by any means it covers all levels, but I do think it allows you um to see what the possible levels are, the possible scales are, not in like better to worse, but just like, from which angle do I want to look at myself, right? From which angle do I want to observe myself? And it's really fun. So thank you for listening, and happy exploring.